A quick look at the front here. I showed all the good bits. As usual, I won't make you sit through 2 minutes of tightening a bolt or that kind of stuff. What we want to do is undo this upper arm that runs through there. Now these are really stout. There's a needle roller bearing at both ends up here. It's actually the same one used in the flywheel housing on the early 3-synchro gearboxes. If you can get all of this undone by removing this rebound buffer right here that limits how far the suspension droops. And these are usually pretty knackered. Here's the one. You can see they're pretty well flattened out. Back to removing these. I've already loosened up. It takes a 3/4 inch wrench. You can get it with an open end wrench here and here usually. And then there's two little 7/16 cap screws that go into a flange, an oval shaped 2-bolt flange that holds this end together. You can get to all of those bits. You undo this with this removed. Now I can reach and I can just kind of grab the wheel here. You can see I'm at the end of the suspension travel. You can see right there I've got movement, which means we don't have a compressed spring here anymore. When you release these all the way down with the shock removed, it droops just enough that if you undo these, there's no load here really. You can slip that shaft out relatively easily, and then everything just falls out. If you look down here, you see that oval shaped plate. There's a little gap there, in fact. So once you remove this over here, let's see if I can get in there and show a little bit of a... There really isn't enough room to remove that nut with the thread protruding because the floor of the car is right there. And so you use that to your advantage. You loosen that nut and then force, you can see the gap here created as that piece gets pushed out. Now I'll probably leave that nut on for a moment as I pry this out. But actually once you get this end to let go, you have quite a bit of leeway. This thing moves around and you can position that a number of ways, hopefully to your advantage. All right, so after removing the nut and the washer from that side, you can see here that you can get some kind of a wedge. A big screwdriver is very handy, of course. You can pry this out a bit, and you can see now that you've pulled this spacer out, which kind of tightened all of this up. Now it's got some movement. It's pretty well unloaded, and you can see it can kind of wobble the front. And you can see how much movement there. That spring, that big rubber donut, is not going to fit through this opening. You can get the coil springs in through here if you're servicing, say, the joint knuckles or something, but there's no way to fit the rubber spring through there. So as we're changing it, this has to come out. Conveniently enough, that gives us all of the flexibility and the range of motion needed without having to compress that spring. All right, so from the top end here, you can see the big nut still on here. Move that nut, the plate, the spacer, leaving that shaft a much smaller profile. See how it looks with the most of the hardware removed here. Pardon my arm in the way, but here we go. See, it's got a little machined side there, so it fits into that opening, locates that arm, and of course allows the arm itself to pivot on the shaft when everything's tightened up on those needle roller bearings. Let me see if I can kind of wobble the upper ball joint here. You can see how that arm there has quite a range of motion. All right, we can see here, but just by using a little bit of leverage over here, once I was able to free this end, just simply by sliding it out. You can see here that the existing trumpet, right, it's still in place, but I was able to actually push this shaft out enough to knock it out this hole and actually bring the arm out with the shaft still inside it. So that was nice, and I seldom wear gloves, but boy, this kind of stuff's a pretty big mess. And now you're pretty much free to bring this upper, while leaving the upper ball joint connected, you can bring the arm out here, get in there, service it. With the new clean pieces and the new bearings put back in, simple enough to knock the old needle rollers out, clean out the bore, install new bearings, just knock them in gently with a piece of flat wood. If you get it sort of just like this, flush over here, well, you can just feed it through the hole. And if I had both hands, I'd be able to move this upper ball joint and line that thing up. And voila, that shaft gets installed that way. Yes, there's a thrust washer here, but you don't need to install the one on that side. until you're at the front of it there. Bits here. This piece can be installed from the front over the nut, and when you tighten it up, it forces it into that bore, lines it up. So I'm going to install the joint knuckle here after cleaning out the little cup area. One quick note, at some point in its life, if the ball is allowed to wear through the plastic cup, it'll sort of put a little divot, a little rounded area in there. I like to take a little JB weld and put it underneath. If there's any distortion in that cup area, it's probably going to be okay. This one has a slight bit of distortion. The cup that came out hadn't broken through, it was working perfectly fine. But a little JB weld makes that a perfect cone shape again. And these are plastic, so I don't like to have a big rounded area that is unsupported. And this is a very, very minor amount, but I'm going to go ahead and just put a little JB weld in the bottom of that cone to fully support this cone inside that cup. And one more little trick since we're showing all the good stuff. Here's the new spring, and what's this? This is probably a Pontiac head bolt from one of the Pontiac 389 or 400s. 7/16 14 thread, I think. This is a metric that came with these springs, but it does engage nicely the bottom plate of the spring. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take and drop this bolt down through the opening that, let's see if we can go in this way, up there, and engage the bottom of that spring to hold it in place. Let's see if we can see what we're talking about up here. You see the hole there. Grab the head of that bolt, and that spring holds itself right there. And you can see the hole here where the upper arm's gonna have to come through from below. I've put my camera on the mount here. You can see I've laid the hardware out. Inside this arm here, I've put the thrust washer and the seal on the outside of the back, the rear of the car side of the front subframe. Up here, you've got that 2-bolt flange, and all I did on that side was install the seal. Now let's see here, this may or may not be worth showing, but we'll see if we can work around the camera. You have to start out with this in place, and then try to, there's my favorite word again, finagle it in. So there, as I inadvertently pushed the camera away, I did manage to kind of wobble this in, put it up in the hole. See now that the ball came out of the plastic cup. No big deal, it's just a rubber seal, and that actually gives us a little bit more flexibility there, but we can line this up. The spring's up there, held up by that bolt. This usually makes things work better. There. There we go, look at that. What happened here is I bumped the camera. We were looking at the fender over here, and I managed to pop it in. So now we got this lined up. I still don't have the pin pushed from the engine compartment. I have to reach up here and kind of, whoop, see, that's what happens. It was hitting it with my arm. That's what did it. I'll reach around here and have to locate this pin, threaded end, where I can start the nut. All the while keeping these rubber seals in place. Maybe we can see the one in here is a bit squashed, but basically when we install the thrust washer and that oval locating plate from the front, we should be able to straighten out that one. This one here, the thrust washer and the seal are all in place. Let me jump out. I can't even move with the camera where it is, but once that pin's in place, everything's held. Just a matter of locating, tightening up, adjusting, putting the shock back on. All right, the last few details here. I've reinstalled the shock absorber, and I noticed that this does have what are called these lowering upper shock mounts, resulting in a shorter overall shock. And here is where the detail lies. My friends there, Mini Mania, were out of. I needed 2 of these oversized, they're called rebound buffers, a polyurethane block there. You can see I've reinstalled the old one. And that's really not gonna provide, you can see here if I release my high-tech little jack, you see how low that will pretty much fall out of, it'll loosen up the spring up here. Not a huge deal. I mean, it's not great for the axles to let them droop all the way down unnecessarily and such. It won't be the end of the world, but what I'm going to do here, just as a little trick, until a few days here, the remaining parts should come in. But this is another one of the Cooper Road Mini high-tech fixes. I got a little wedge of hardwood there. Should be pretty strong here. We're not going autocrossing, but you can see here that limiting that return. Ta-da! Now the suspension stays tight. The springs stay tight, and that's the idea with that oversized buffer. Is when you jack the car up, your springs aren't wobbling around up there. Now let's take a quick look at this side here, just for comparison. Let's turn it to the side. You can see, let's sneak in here. You can see the installed oversized buffer right here that prevents the suspension from drooping, such that the springs unload. You can see I've got this set pretty much all the way down. We're just going to see how this looks as low as it can be. I mentioned that I lowered the rear, and we'll set this all the way down just to see how this looks, and then we'll raise it up so that we can ship it safely. All right, wheel back on, and that about completes the job of installing high-lows and the red coil springs on our 70 minivan. Perhaps not. It is, after all, a miniature van. But come on, it's a van. Maybe just. Maybe not. That's an equipment timeout. Wait a minute. Let's see. What does it take to put a basic track mountain bike? Perhaps we found the angle, but now we can't get the dog out.